Hi, Chris.
Right. Nice to have you back on the podcast. Very good to have you on here, especially in the wake of Freedom in the Arts and their survey that they've procured and results that came out last week, I believe. So last week from the time this interview's been filmed. So I wanted to talk to you about that as well. And also Freedom Arts are doing some work with the Free Speech Union, I believe some fund, which we'll talk about later. But first of all, in regards to this report that came out, which is Afraid to Speak Freely, I believe the name of the report is. Can you just explain why Freedom of Arts decided to do that report? What prompted it?
What prompted it? I think it was mainly just the number of people that approached us, telling us that worked in the arts and telling us that they were having problems with colleagues or with leaders in the sector, just being able to say perfectly normal and mainstream ideas. And for some that had led to bullying. And it felt like it's not good enough just to have a series of anecdotes, to perhaps so that we can relate to others what's happening in the sector. We needed to have a bit more of a benchmark, what's changed, how that sort of how the climate of fear in the arts is developing. So we have been looking at different research options, and then we were really pleased to read a report that was commissioned back in 2019. Well, it was undertaken in 2019 by an industry publication called Arts Professional.
Mm-hmm.
Arts Professional is based in Cambridge. It's long-standing. It's very much an industry magazine, but particularly the subsidised industry, which I suppose what I mean by that is part of the arts that isn't commercially funded entirely through ticket sales, but also sees public funding. So, they've done this piece of work called a pulse survey, in which they'd basically done it online, asked 18 questions, some open text, some yes, no, maybe, and people just volunteered and filled it in, and that came up with a set of data around these very issues of do you self-censor or do you feel censored? And actually it was a really good piece of work, thought, but it came out in February 2020. And if you remember February 2020, that was kind of the date before everything stopped.
Yeah.
And so the findings of that report were a little bit lost in what happened afterwards. And if you remember back to that time, March 2020 was kind of an existential moment for the arts, because it was the moment that our then Prime Minister Boris Johnson told the nation to avoid theatres in particular. And I remember the day after he said that, thinking, oh my God,
Yeah.
how can venues survive if the government has told them not to attend? And obviously, after that we went into lockdown, and a lot happened in those COVID years, really, so 2020, 21, 22. So the findings that happened that the pulse that was taken, I suppose, in 2019, we just thought, well, we're going to repeat that process, because we're 5 years later, and our sector, the arts, has gone through enormous upheaval in that time. Many people left the sector. Some organisations closed, as a result of COVID. So where are we now, 5 years later? And what started out as let's try it, let's see what happens. Actually, once we got the survey results back, we were really excited by it because we had pretty much the same level of engagement as the arts professional survey did, and you know, very deep engagement as well. So the people that took part in the survey, although they were they'd volunteered themselves, so they're not representative of the arts in general. You know, we don't claim it to be representative, just claim it to be self-selecting survey, same way as the arts professional survey was self-selecting. But what was exciting when we started to match up the data, comparing it between 2025 and 2020, is that the trends that we saw in 2020 are just the same in 2025, except it's even more pronounced. So some of the questions that looked at, example, do you speak freely? Even more people now don't speak freely than did back in 2020. So we thought, wow, this is valuable. This is really valuable. And that's how we came to publish the report about a week ago. We published it together with Reading University and through an academic citation. So it's also held at the British Library for forever. And we've had some great responses, actually. You know, a lot of press have picked up the story. What did you think of the report, Chris?
I thought it was very thorough. It confirmed a lot of what I thought was the case. In particular, there was nothing in there that really surprised me. There's probably a couple of individual stories that may surprise me a little bit, but in terms of the actual findings, in terms of the intimidation and why people do that didn't really surprise me at all. I mean, first I know I used to do spoken word for a short while, for a few years, and I wasn't say I was intimidated because I'll just say what I want. Oh, that's just me, but I could see certainly in that scene where things were changing, where certain people were saying not just about certain topics, but they were talking about certain topics in a particular way. That was a weird thing for me that they weren't even talking about it from a new perspective, so to speak. And that would have been 2014 when I started seeing that. So for me, it wasn't a surprise a lot what happened in the report. I mean, funny enough, in the actual the report that Freedom in the Arts did, the word fear, I think is mentioned, but did you say 31 times in that? Doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all because if not just what I've seen, but even more so, see, because I left the poetry scene quite a few years ago, even more what I've heard from other people, it doesn't surprise me at all, and it's sad in a way. And actually, that's what one of the questions I was going to ask you. In that, when people talk about intimidation in the arts, what form does that intimidation take, and what did this? Well, more accurately, what did this survey? Did you mention about what form this intimidation took?
Um, I mean, you know, we interviewed a number of people as well, well, case studies, and so we were able to find out about their experiences, and you know, the type of intimidation. I mean, first of all, a lot of people don't even get to the point where they're actually harassed, which is, I guess, the legal word for bullying. Bullied, haven't been bullied, because they don't expose themselves at all, so they don't speak freely. So the first step of that intimidation process, I suppose, is that you self-censor, that you don't speak and you don't touch certain topics, or you're evasive of because you fear reprisal. And you're right to fear reprisal, because people can suffer things like it'll start with I think sort of rumours or feel people felt marked, or and then somebody might come along and say something directly, either in a quite often online, and some big fear around social media being accused of something on social media, which is obviously really left, certainly since 2014, but even since 2020, the concerns around social media has really changed. And then that might go a little bit further. So you might find yourself being investigated by a manager or an organization and in some ways, if you are investigated, at least you've kind of got an opportunity to know what's going on, because quite often what happens in the arts is you're just dropped. And as you know, so many people are freelance that you might suspect that somebody's criticized you for an opinion. But it's quite difficult to prove that, because you're freelance, haven't been investigated. At least if you're investigated, you can see what is the issue. You know? So some of that experience of intimidations, you don't actually know what's happened, but you know something's happened. So that leads to kind of paranoia. You know, I mean, I sound paranoid saying it, but you know, we can all imagine ourselves in that scenario. And the problem is many people have experienced it in the arts. So some of the case studies, you can see that people have lost contracts, careers have collapsed virtually. And one of the things that came out really strongly as well in the survey was whereas a few years ago people were experiencing harassment from colleagues. That has leapt up. That figure is much higher now than it was 5 years ago. So that's something really disturbing, that it's colleagues and friends, it's the people closest to you that are prepared to attack you or intimidate you or silence you. And then some of the stories are where nothing's actually happened. There hasn't been an episode, or there hasn't been, you haven't said anything. It just becomes a rumour, and then people avoid you. And the thing I find remarkable about the whole thing is that we do actually live in a democratic society in which we're encouraged to hold our own opinions, and to vote alongside them, and to operate in a democracy under a majority. So to get to the point where people in a sector in which artistic expression is the bread and butter, but self-censorship has become the norm, in a society in which everybody's free to speak, within legal norms, not allowed to incite violence against others, or that just seems extraordinary to me, that we've actually given that ground away in the very sector that should be celebrating it. And that's come out in both of the reports. And when I say both, I mean the arts professional one in 2020 and the one in 2025. There's a question in it around, do you think it's the role of the arts to protect artistic freedom? How important is it? And both surveys said we think it's really important. We think this is a very important feature of our sector. And the implication of that is of our democracy as well. And yet, this is the sector which is giving that up. And in fact, there was a report published a few days ago asking arts leaders about their experience of leadership as in the arts. And so, we're talking about people such as the director of Tate, director of Royal Opera House. there is a reference, they do reference this idea that, oh, there's a fear of cancel culture, but they don't reference their responsibility to protect artistic freedom and freedom of expression in the arts as leaders. That appears to be ceded away. They don't see it as their responsibility. And I thought that was extraordinary that that report came out at the same time as ours, pretty much, today's difference. And arts leaders don't see it as their responsibility to protect freedom of expression.
Just wondering, actually, just quickly go back before I say my next question, which is, you said that when Freedom Arts decided to do this report, you did it in conjunction with Reading University. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We worked with Professor Jo Phoenix, and she helped us a lot with the data analysis because we had so much data. And in fact, if you go on our website, you can see we also worked with Dr. Richard Norrie, and he developed a dashboard for us so that rather than publish every single statement that people made, had a lot of free text. We put it all into a kind of interactive dashboard so you can bring up particular questions and look at those responses. So between Richard and Joe, we had some really great academics to work with. And one that was very reassuring because they've done this kind of work before, so that was great. But two, they were able to reassure us that this is a strong piece of work, that this is a piece of work with the number of the amount of data that we collected, and also the number of participants or respondents that we had involved in this report. This is a substantial snapshot of what's going on for some in the arts at the moment. So it's actually published on the University of Reading Library website, and that means that it gets a specific, I don't know the term, but it gets a specific reference number, which means it can be catalogued into the British Library collection for all time. So it lives beyond us, our organisations. So that was really good. Yes. Next question.
Now, I ask about the university because I know we're talking about the arts, but universities have been through this as well in regards to the cancellations and whatnot. So I found it curious that you were able to pair with a university to do this, because I imagine there would have been a lot of universities that would have turned down the opportunity to do this survey with you.
Well, that's a good question, and there's always more to every piece of work. That's great when you get to the end of it, isn't it? You've got the finished piece, but there's always there's sometimes issues leading up to it. But it was great to work with Reading, and it's great to work with Joe. And I suppose in universities they've gone, I guess it's a comparative culture, in that it's it's a highly educated sector. It's highly competitive. It works in it's deeply embedded in the humanities. I'm just sort of thinking the comparison with the arts, and a lot of people are on short-term contracts, or they're freelance, or doing bits and pieces. So in terms of employment prospects, people are a little bit vulnerable. And I think if you have that kind of level of vulnerability, and you have institutions or organizations or cliques that believe, as many in the arts do, and indeed as many in humanities in universities do, that they've got a moral purpose over and above kind of their day-to-day work, that they're bringing kind of a moral impetus to society. And within that, you've got kind of people who are employment-wise quite vulnerable. You can end up bullying, The left can bully, the morally good people can bully each other. And I guess in higher education, that has led to uh, the development of the Higher Education Act, which Freedom of Speech Act, which allows the Office for Students to examine the universities in which they think freedom of speech has not been protected by the university, and then to sanction them if they believe that's the case. And we've seen that recently with the Office for Students issuing a fine to the University of Sussex for not protecting their lecturer, Professor Kathleen Stott. So that's taken a different route. So what's happened in higher education is new legislation has come in to protect freedom of expression, and it's seen a few limits. It doesn't include students; it's just for staff or for lecturing staff. But it puts the onus back on universities to have that responsibility to protect expression. So a question for us is that what's needed in the arts? And I don't know the answer to that, I have to be honest with you. I would like to do a whole other piece of research to what that might look like. My instinct is not to bring in more legislation necessarily, and actually, there's so many issues around that, because you can't necessarily know what the impact, what unintended consequences might come out the other end of bringing in a piece of legislation which tries to kind of police a sector that's so, well, that's one, very fragile, two, quite fractious between its existing staff groups, and three, very world kind of broken up, and lots of different freelance people and that. So I don't know if that's the way forward for the arts, but definitely needs leaders to take on board this issue here and to publicly commit to expression, and to then start looking at processes that they have in their organisations and venues that will ensure that they've got the strategies and measures to protect that.
Yeah, I think with regulation, I think one of the issues is obviously, like, by the definition of its name, is to regulate. And
Yeah.
so what regulations would they put in place? You know, if you have one government that's pretty think, okay, as long as you don't cancel each other, that's fine, and you can just do what you want. And then another government could come in and say, no, actually, I want it to be a bit more censorious and so on. I mean, you see this a little bit with things like Ofcom, which is regulating TV, and how they can change their views sometimes. Even film classifications are sometimes debated as well. I don't think you need a need for another regulator. And with a regulator, even if everything was fine initially, you've created some jobs from that. So if they successfully regulate freedom in the arts, well, what else are they going to regulate? And so I think that would be issues in regard to that as well. And in a way, antithesis to the arts, because arts is supposed to be rebellious. And how can you be rebellious to people who are regulating you with that in your mind? So, I mean, that's my personal view. I don't think a regulator would be a good idea. But in saying that, I don't know what would be a good idea, how people go about it. As I say, maybe that's something else, another thing that you could come from this. And I was going to talk about actions afterwards, what we can do afterwards, but I'll talk about that at the end. In regards to participants, they're feeling this, they're feeling the fear, they're feeling the self-censorship and the cancellations. Was it what demographic of people did make up? Were more left wing, were they more right wing, were they more white, were they more ethnic minorities, were they more men, were they more women? Was there anything particular in regards to the groups that were suffering from this that was similar, regardless of what art form they took up?
That, to be honest. We looked at We asked everybody's protected characteristics according to the Equality Act, and that they're on the dashboard, so you can look at a particular characteristic, like ethnicity or whatever, sex or whatever, and see what the responses are against those questions. But we decided that the characteristics just didn't come up in any of the questions.
Okay.
Like, and we did have this discussion, like, should we look at this through the lens, I suppose, of the protected characteristics? Is there a need to do that? So are people, so for example, the question is a certain group more likely to be intimidated or bullied than another group?
Yeah.
And that didn't really come up in any of the free survey things. I mean, other than, the one that's really, really strong is the belief one around believing that sex is beautiful, as in gender beautiful beliefs. But so then what? Would we do an analysis on beliefs? It didn't feel appropriate. So we decided not to do an analysis against protected characteristics. Although we did collect them, and you can do it yourself if you want to look at it. We definitely had more women in survey than men, and certainly more white people than black people. And I think there'll be a range of reasons for that. And we also acknowledge that because we're a campaigning organisation, and we're a little bit public, that people know us, and spoke, and in some of the questions actually spoke to us directly as Denise and Rosie or anything. So that will have drawn a different demographic as well. But yeah, we deliberately decided not to look at whether, because if we'd come away from the data saying, right, there is a particular demographic that are experiencing harassment, and really all we could say was this particular demographic, which is gender critical people, and we kind of made that clear in the report anyway. Yeah. But again, I think could that be another area to discuss? Not age tension. We know there's tensions between demographics around age as well. But there could be more work on that. But you've got to kind of ask yourself, what does that bring to the report? Does that tell us more? I'm not sure at this level it was going to. It's kind of the next level. What? Because the next question is, why is this happening? And what are we going to do? And in a way, this report, this is just a survey, really. This doesn't tell us why this has happened. I mean, there's some really interesting quotes. So there's one quote from one of the case, I think it's one of the case studies, where the person talked about what used to be a disagreement from the person's point of view, and even if it got heated, you might say, "Oh, I really don't agree with you about that. Actually, I don't want to talk to you anymore about it. Let's agree to differ." Has turned into like you just completely dislike the person, and will no longer have anything else anymore to do with the person. So it's not just that they have a belief you don't like; they become somebody you don't like, and that kind of demonization process. Given that we're always going to have, we're always going to meet people who don't agree with, part of the human being, has been particularly polarizing. And I wonder whether that, I think that's quite part of the arts, because the arts is a profession in which you have to practice in the public realm, practice in public. You're about audience. Your whole career, 18 to 80, is about making things for the public, so you're always seen. So that means that if at some point in your career between 18 and 80, say at 30, somebody decides that you're a bad person, it's a view that you've held, because the rest of your career for the next 50 years is still in the public realm, you're constantly vulnerable to people saying it again. You know, and
Yeah.
and particularly with social media, because you're always in public. So so kind of disparaging comments go on forever.
Mhm.
And that's not just that social media won't take them down or get an article pulled, said something disparaging about it. It means that every time you have an exhibition, or every time you put a show on, every time you're selected for a show, somebody's going to moan about you, or you might get a ticket, or you might, you know, and it becomes kind of endless. And it ends up losing, some of the people we spoke to, the very point when they were 30, for example, that they said something that somebody disagreed with. That's all forgotten. They've just become kind of social, you know, witch, you know, in the public mind. So it makes practicing from 18 to 80 or making artwork really quite difficult.
Yeah, it very much does, and it's a shame that this has happened. And I was thinking this as well, in that when something like this happens, if this wasn't the arts and this was like a general workplace, and this was what was happening, you would get the unions to sort this out. What's happened to the art unions in this case? Because I've heard nothing from them in regards to supporting artists that are going through this at the moment.
Well, we need to. There are some strong unions in the arts, but I'm not seeing quite any
Mm.
expression basis. So I think the next step for us is to start speaking to the equity positions union. Unfortunately, had sent their apologies. They were going to attend our launch event, which we held. So I'm sure there's people working in those unions that recognise there's issues here. But for some reason, it's easier. It is easier just to demonise people.
Yeah.
And certainly we've seen, you know, since the Supreme Court hearing, judgment
Mhm.
a month ago, Equity, for example, has talked about you know, they're not happy with the judgment, basically.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, how far they would actually protect individuals that are happy with judgment and that are prepared to abide by the law. You know, there'll be a case at some point. There will be a case among those unions. And in fact, that's something that the Deputy Director of Index on Censorship said about the launch of our board. You know, all of these theatres that are publishing statements or signing up to statements saying that they are not happy to follow the Supreme Court judgment and ensure that they provide single-sex services for their audiences and for their staff. There will be a court case that will come up soon, just as a result of that. So, actually, I mean, on that subject, I did have this little exchange with somebody online, and they were saying, well, it's very interesting that you're talking about freedom of expression,
Mhm.
parenting, and that what you're also doing in the same breath is kind of threatening legal action by saying you're not upholding the law.
Mhm.
I thought actually that is quite an interesting point.
Mm.
But the problem is that the law is there to provide an impartial and free and open democratic space, you know, and I think if you don't abide by rule of law, you don't have democracy, you have kind of the monopoly of tiny minorities, very, very small minorities setting the rules for everybody else. So we have to have rule of law, and we have to have impartial venues in order to enable a thriving democracy where we can be free to express. So it's odd, this idea that use the law, use lawfare to create freedom. But that, I think, is where we're at.
Yeah, indeed. And it seems, just following on from that, like a lot of this, it seems very, not just what you've said, but in terms of the fear in the art, it seems very dictatorial in that it's very, you either believe in this or that's it will cancel you. There seems to be no discussion about it whatsoever. And especially, as I said before, with artists that tend to be, by their very nature, tend to be rebellious and tend to question everything, it seems more sad now that artists just aren't questioning as much as they used to. Like I'm actually all for all views, if that's fine, but it seems like it's only one view and so on, and I don't know how we get around it. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe in a few years, like I say, because it's a minority, eventually more and more people will develop the fortitude to actually speak up against this, and that will drown the minority views. But yeah, it's worrying times as an artist, and actually, one thing I was going to speak about is the funding for this. So, since that Supreme Court judgment, and actually since your report, has there been any news in terms of the funding for the particular arts projects at all?
There's a lot of arts funders. There's a lot of trusts and foundations, very large trusts and foundations, such as the Esmond Fairburn or Hamlin Foundation. And then obviously there's the arts councils in all four nations. I don't think anyone actually published anything particularly that would relate to funding and relationship with people. So I don't think there is actually a direct relationship there. But I mean, the Arts Council at the moment, the Arts Council of England is going through a review process. And of course, we've got a budget coming up. What's it called? I think it's a budget in June, early June, which will set out the funding for the Department of Culture, Media and Sport in England and Wales. In England, but also devolve funding for the other nations, from which they'll then decide how much they can give to culture. And everyone's a little bit gloomy that that funding will get cut. In fact, there've even been rumours that they might break up the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And it is an interesting department because it's the smallest department. But it's a small department, but it has lots and lots of contracts with external agencies. So they're called arm's length bodies. So they're directly funded by government, but they're independent, which is the meaning of arm's length. So that their decision-making process is arm's length to government. They don't just deliver government's diktats. And the Department of Culture, Media and Sport has the largest number of called ALBs, arm's length bodies, to any other department. So, for example, it oversees Ofcom mentioned, oversees all of the national museums, like Science Museum Group, the Arts Council, National Lottery and Heritage Fund, Sport England, the gambling, whatever it is, association commission, so racing commission. So all of those bodies, which are many of them funders, a few of them are regulators, are all funded and governed by Department of Culture, Media and Sport. So you could argue really that this department is basically just evolving government policy to all of these little agencies, so they can kind of do what they like there, which perhaps is right, perhaps, you know. But when it comes to things like, well, the law has been clarified, you must now deliver the law, it seems to me completely inappropriate that an organisation, an arm's length body, might type up that, well, they don't like it very much, they don't want to deliver the law, you know. So there are sort of, see, there is a question about whether a department like Department of Culture, Media and Sport is actually worth having if all of this delivery is through ALBs who are so independent, they, you know, they avoid the law. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah. So I mean, the other side of that is that the arts sector, some in the arts sector have, are very fearful of losing the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, because it certainly in the arts, probably in sport, maybe in broadcasting, but it has such a knowledge of that sector. So if you broke it up and moved all of those ALBs, like BBC, moved them into Department of Education or Department of Community Housing, or, you know, would they then struggle, one, to keep their funding as they would like, and two, to have government expertise on their side. So I'm not sure. So it'd be really interesting to see what does happen. I think in some ways Labour have been quite radical. They've made quite big decisions. And I could see that being a decision that might come. But certainly there's a lot of worry that there's going to be big changes in the arts. I mean, the timing's not great because the budget comes before the review of the Arts Council is published. But interestingly, that's been extended. That review was due to submit in April, but now has extended to the end of June. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, with a rumour breakup of a DCMS and what everything at Parliament, at least you may have some people who know have an idea of culture, have an idea of like media and sport and whatnot. Kind of what you just explained there, it wouldn't be a danger of if you put in like another department that people just basically want to understand what to do with it basically. So for example, if you put say culture and you say education, like how would education secretary, how are they going to integrate that into education or even business? You put like media or sport or culture into business, well then you're just thinking about more profit margins where I'm not saying you can't make art for money, but a lot of art, majority of art transcends that. So again, whatever people's views may have on the DCMS, do you think there's an issue that if you put in like culture and arts in one of the departments, people are just not going to know what to do with it? And you could also just basically push that arts to the side in some respects as well.
Yeah, I think there'd be a risk of being sidelined, but I actually kind of think, I mean, like civil servants, they work across every department with their careers. They don't, their expertise is being civil servants. It's not necessarily art forms or sport or that knowledge. And the permanent secretary at GCMS at the moment is a background banking. You know, it's not painting. So that, you know, they work across many sectors. So I'm kind of less worried about the expertise issue, because the expertise is really in the sector. It's not really in the office. And that's right, as it should be. But I'd be more worried about it just because it's being sidelined and there isn't a strategy or a will to develop it or address those issues. But yeah, we'll see. But I think again, coming back to this issue of freedom of expression, that again, that's not enshrined at GCMS any more so than it is in various agencies. It's a problem at the highest level. Not from kind of a freelance individual just trying to make something that think is unfashionable, or I don't know, great play celebrating Brexit or something like that, but trying to get that put on. It's the same issue at DCMS, are equally, in my view, not really active protecting freedom of expression. And you would think it would be the centre, really.
Yeah. But yeah.
But we do have the laws to do it. We've got the Human Rights Act, signatories to the UN Declaration. So we've got a framework there. But you won't find it in any document.
Yeah.
And that's what we want, really. That's what we want to see, is that it is a little bit more centred in the institutions. So there is an active responsibility to protect it, and recognition that people in power, if you don't protect it, you will lose it. And it's not necessarily that people are deliberately subverting freedom of expression. It's just that they're taking it for granted and they're not protecting it. And in the meantime, passionate, strong opinioned groups have swiped it from us.
Yeah, it's interesting times for sure. And one thing I was going to ask you, actually, speaking of interesting times, again, since the report came out, Freedom in the Arts has teamed up with the Free Speech Union to help establish this fund. Can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Well, we were very lucky to work with a donor that particularly wanted to support people in performing arts who were experiencing harassment or bullying for their views. And we don't provide legal services. Free Speech Union does, and I think they've got about 15,000 members now. Got like 19,000 subscribers as well. They really have become a trade union. As in the word union there, you pay your subs and then get legal advice, and if you think you've got a case, they'll defend you. And so as a result of that partnership, it made sense for us to establish that legal fighting fund with Free Speech Union, so that we can support their legal services. So people working in performing arts, that's dance, music, theatre, find themselves being harassed out of their employment or out of their well-being, they can speak to Free Speech Union, and there's funding there to help them defend them.
Okay. When does that funding kick in? Is that if say there now? So what I mean is in terms of like the artist. So say an artist is experiencing what we just described in terms of censorship and whatnot and so on. Would they have to go to? Imagine they'd have to go to like the Free Speech Union straight away. Like they couldn't just get access to that fund, say down like when the court case is already happening and all that sort of stuff. You'd have to be things straight away.
And you still need to be a member.
Yeah.
But membership is really reasonable rate at FSU. well, it's certainly a lot cheaper than equity. Yeah, and you know what? Let's hope things don't get to court, because that's costly and very stressful for all parties. And the best thing is if you get good legal advice and then be able to resolve the situation with whoever it is or the employer. That's always the best way forward. Lawfare is probably the way to go on with.
Yeah, cool. Try and play crystal ball a little bit. Obviously, in 5 years' time, where would you like this in terms of freedom of expression and freedom of speech and all the issues that arts world is having with those two concepts? Where would you like to see it develop in, like, say, 5 years' time? Like, if you were doing this interview 5 years' time, where would you like the whole concept to develop? Because it can't keep going on like this, because at the moment arts world's just being fractured over this. So where would you like it to be in, say, 5 years' time, realistically?
There was a quote in the which we didn't publish because it's took us in a very different direction. But honestly, I thought it was so interesting. And there was somebody who told us about their experience growing up, and I'm going to call her she. I don't know if she is a she, but she sounded like a she to me, whatever that means. And she talked about growing up in Northern Ireland in a Catholic background, and she went to college at 18, 19, and she went to a Catholic college in Derry. And this it was just after Bloody Sunday, which in 1972, so, in which people were shot, died in conflict following British Army gunfire. And she was very, very unusual in her community. She was a Catholic that was anti-Republican. She didn't believe in the United Ireland. She wanted Northern Ireland to stay part of the UK. And obviously she was really unusual. And in this Catholic college, she was the only person that thought that. And she talked about that. She said she always talked about it. She always talked on panels about it. She had loads of arguments with her friends about it. And she said she never got cancelled, and she never experienced any kind of aggression of anybody, and she never fell out with any of her friends. She was always free to say what she wanted to say. And this is a person in a war zone. Speaking about a really minority view from her community. And she said now she wouldn't dare speak about certain things in the art, but that was. And you sort of think, God, if we could get to a place like that where people can talk about stuff, disagree, but not fall out, and not demonize the other person, and just not call each other names.
Yeah.
That would be incredible. That would be absolutely incredible. But in order to get to that place, you know, we're going to have to say this is important. We have to protect everybody's opportunity to speak, you know, respectfully, legally, as in can't incite hatred, and openly. And people have to feel confident to do that. And when we asked people, you know, people came up with different, quite a lot of people had views about this, a lot focused on things like the government agencies and funding agencies. But quite a few people said, actually, even though things are pretty grim in the arts, so I can't say fearful, there are now quite a few organisations raising the alarm about this, and individuals. And so now there's a kind of grouping together of people feeling freer to speak. I think, for example, there is so there's a couple of arts groups that are forming to kind of support people speaking freely as well as ourselves. So just us making noise, I think, does actually change climate.
Indeed.
Yeah, so hopefully, yeah, we get back to 1972 in Derry. Strange
Yeah.
place to head towards, but
Strange
yeah,
place, which is illustrative of what's happened. That a view like that, like a woman
yeah,
of that who can say those views and nothing happens to her,
yeah, yeah,
whereas you could say even the smallest thing, and
yeah.
it's just and that's the thing with me. It's not so much. It's not just a disagreement. It's the ruining of a livelihood. That's what worries me. It's by all means, I can have a disagreement with you, any other person, but it's the ruining of a livelihood that's always struck me. Like, if you don't like me, fine, but to actually spend all your energy trying to make sure that a person can't be employed again in their chosen field, or they'll be smeared, and so it's just. And this has been going on for just over a decade, and it still surprises me that that still happens.
And
Yeah,
it's a lot of goodwill, isn't it? Like sometimes you see people have just made a mistake, or they've got the
yeah,
words tangled up, or sometimes it's just like nothing. And they
yeah.
become demonized. I'm thinking about Martin Speed, so at Trinity, um, accused of racism. It's ridiculous.
Mm.
Lost his job, lost his career, lost all of his. Do you know his case, Chris?
No, explain who.
Yes, so Martin was a lecturer. I think it was Trinity. Anyway, he'd been a lecturer for a very long time in teaching jazz, and he's a musician as well. He tours and he makes stuff and he works with people um, outside lecturing, and he was asked. He joined a staff consultation on, I think, on their equality, diversity, and inclusion policy, and uh, this was just for staff, and he argued that um, he didn't think that jazz was institutionally racist as a art form, and that he was more interested in just focusing on meritocracy and musicianship than platforming kind of skin colour or going on about that. And somehow his response ended up getting published, and his students took it as a racist statement. And then they started to refuse to go to his classes. So then the management investigated him and brought in an Arts Council funded organisation which specialises in developing black music to help the investigation
Mhm.
into whether or not he's racist. Um, and eventually exonerated him, although I don't know if he was suspended or he went off sick. He might have gone off sick actually. Um, so he left the college for a period of time whilst this investigation went on and on and on. Eventually, he was exonerated, came back to the college to carry on teaching, but no students with his classes. Having that, work there anymore. And I just think, that's so destructive.
With what evidence?
Hmm?
With what evidence? Like just one rumor, one thing he said. It just seems.
Yeah, well, it kind of didn't want to. I mean, I suppose we'd call it critical race theory. He didn't want to kind of deal with race all the time. Musician,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
musicians, everywhere. Um, and that view in itself was taken to be racist. Um, I mean, it's a different view to other people's views, but it's not racist. It's a way of looking at things. But I suppose that's what I'm saying. That does that person have to be demonized? I think that in itself isn't aggressive or
yeah.
discriminatory, isn't discriminatory. to me, it kind of devalues the word racism.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what is it? What is racism? It's just as weak as that. It's anyway. Yes, where would we go? So kind of saying that. Yeah, that to me just demonstrates that people have developed this kind of sort of scent for the pursued people. You know, they're on your tail and being pursued, and it's just there's no goodwill
yeah,
towards
yeah,
that person, towards the other person. Where you just say, "Oh, I don't really agree with that perfectly," but I know you're not saying it because you're a racist. You've just got a different
yeah.
political view.
Mhm. Something I've wondered for a while as well. A lot of stuff what we've talked about in this interview, it kind of overshadows actual bad things that are happening in the arts, things that actually need to be fixed in the arts. All that's been overshadowed because of this nonsense that's been happening for over a decade. For instance, the lack of working class people that are attending theatres and why that is the case. I may be wrong on this, but there seems to be less school trips in terms of going to theatres or museums and how that hasn't been impacting in regards to what their viewpoint is of art when they grow up to be adults. Those sorts of problems, all that seems important, and all those seems to be overshadowed by all this stuff that we're talking about. I don't know whether you agree or disagree with that. What are your thoughts?
You know, do think the arts has been working for a long time to try and make it less of a middle class institution. You know, try and get, but they want more people to come.
Mm,
And one tactic is that on museums and galleries it's still largely free to the public, like compared to Europe, where they're not. Um,
mhm,
so, so I do think venues have been working to do that, but I don't think it helps getting involved in kind of quite petty niche areas, and also for that to start to lead your programming. You know, get some of that endless exhibitions about just one theme, one set of ideas.
mhm,
Um, yeah, but I mean, there's so many reasons. I mean, some people argue that the kind of arguments against expertise in the arts has contributed to working class people not wanting to come to it.
mhm,
Perhaps that's a longer conversation about what that means, but um, I think that debate is still live. I wouldn't say it's entirely overshadowed it. There are continuing reports and reporting of actors and others arguing that what's happened to working class people entering the arts. And we could tie it back to example, like difficult to do drama at school.
mhm,
Art and design is held up just about as a subject to GCSE, but drama and dance and music is really, really struggling to get um, to maintain an arts curriculum in those areas.
mhm,
So it's about coming up the ladder as well.
mhm. Yeah, indeed. What's next for future for freedom in the arts after this survey? It's just continuing what you're doing. Are you going to do any more follow-up surveys? Is there going to be an actual plan of action? What are the plans for the organisation?
Well, we want to, as I said, we want to develop a piece of research which looks at what are the steps to reverse what's happened and to bring back a more tolerant theme. We also want to spend more time with arts leaders discussing these findings and looking at whether they've got strategies in their organisations or in their workforces that are helping to keep the conversation open. Some arts leaders argue that they have. We're not seeing the evidence of that yet. And we're also looking at a project called The Unseen, which is about the work that hasn't been made as a result of being cancelled or being deplatformed. And we're looking for different funding streams to help develop that works. start to have a richer artistic canon again as well. Yes, we've got quite a few different projects on the go, but we're absolutely delighted with this piece of work and feel like it's definitely we definitely have the traction that we wanted to have, so we need to keep that going.
If people want to find out more about Freedom in the Arts, where can they go to?
Yeah, well, check us out at freedominthearts.com and on Twitter. Yeah, get in touch. We still have our open letter, which we continue to get people signing to protect artistic freedom in the arts. So, and that we do have regular mail outs as well. So
Cool. Denise, it's been a pleasure having you back on the To Essex Project podcast again. Thank you so much for joining me today.
okay, that's great. Thank you, Chris.